Okay, so, whoops, sorry about that. So Terminix fired me, and I decided that I'd had two really bad experiences with pest control, and I worked for myself for a little while. I did roofing, actually bought a roofing company, and God, that was some hard work. And I was not cut out to be up on a roof in 100+ degree weather and 99% humidity and working that hard on a roof. I did it for a while, and then I sold my company and I went into trucking. And I went to work for a company called Weyerhaeuser, Weyerhouser. Back then we just called it Weyerhaeuser because it was easier to pronounce, but it's probably Weyerhaeuser. And they're, I don't know if they're still in business, but back then they were an international company. And they had little fingers of businesses and all kinds of wood products. You know, they did logging, they made lumber. And the part that I worked for was the distribution of lumber, plywood, dimensional lumber, some other building products. And I worked for a guy who, his name, I'm going to tell you his name. I'm using names here only because I remember them, because these jobs and these people had such an impact on my life and, you know, the direction I went with the rest of my life. His name was Sonny Bryant, and he had a company called Bryant Forest Products back in the early 80s, and he went belly up at a time when business was booming. So that's the kind of businessman he was. He failed in an economy that was booming for all the other forest-related products. So he became the manager of this warehouse owned by Weyerhaeuser. I hope that doesn't get too confusing. It was a distribution warehouse. And what we did was pick up lumber all over Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and bring it back to the warehouse in Shreveport, and then distribute it to the lumber yards as they bought it. And we catered, back then, I don't believe there was the huge lumber yards like the Lowe's and the Home Depots. I don't recall them. I do recall the biggest place that we ever serviced was called 84 Lumber, and that was a big one back then. But otherwise, it was mom and pop lumber yards. And, you know, it was mostly a nice job. I really enjoyed where I went. Picking up in the mills was somewhat enjoyable. But the guy I worked for, Sonny Bryant, was the biggest asshole I ever met in my life. He was such an unethical piece of crap that it was a very difficult job because of him. And here's what he did. You know, trucking's a dangerous job, and when you run heavy, it's even more dangerous. He had the worst equipment of any company I had ever worked for, previous or after that. And he would never fix anything. He would let the brakes wear down to a nub, and he would let them go so long that instead of just replacing brake pads, he would have to replace the brake pads and the drums. I mean, that's how stupid he was. And that's probably why he lost his own business, because, what do they call it? Penny wise, dollar poor. There's a cliche there, but that's sort of what he did. He would not spend $50, and he would wait till it got so bad that you had to spend $500. He was a real idiot, and a hard man to work for. So it wasn't enough that the equipment was subpar. He made us avoid going over scales, and there's a scale pretty much at every line. And then on top of that, occasionally, all throughout, you know, the multi-states, they have these portable scales and portable and, you know, mobile DOT inspectors, and they just randomly set up on a road and pull you over. So you couldn't avoid them because you wouldn't have, you know, any forethought, any foreknowledge of where they were. Well, he ran recaps on his flatbeds, And when you constantly run heavy, 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 and I'm talking about way over the legal 80,000 pound gross, he would make us leave that yard at 90, 95,000, and sometimes more. And he would tell you just avoid the scales. If you get pulled into a scale, let me know, I'll pay the fine. And back then, the fines always went to, the owner or the company. It did not go to the driver. And it wasn't a reflection on your driver's license, although it was a reflection on your character if you knowingly left that heavy constantly on purpose. Occasionally being that heavy without your own knowledge, not knowing you were that heavy happened sometimes. But when you left the yard knowing you were 90,000 pounds and 10,000 pounds over the legal gross, you were really compromising your own personal ethics. So he made us run overweight. He made us dodge scales. He had substandard equipment. He wouldn't pay us past. He would let you work your 14-hour shift, and then if you were still out, you had to drive back, and he wouldn't pay you for it. He was a shyster. And I didn't have a lot of trucking experience, so my choices were few. And I worked there almost a year. And everybody complained about running heavy. Everybody complained about, here's another thing. He would stack these trailers up where they would be over 13.6. Now, 13.6 is nationwide as high as you can have. If you have it higher than that, you got to buy special permits. And you have to plan a special route to avoid bridges that are 13.6 or lower. And they're everywhere. So he would make you run over height without applying for permits and having special routes. He would make you run overweight and insist you avoid scales. And he wouldn't repair the equipment. And to me, here's the straw on the camel's back and the thing that got me fired. He started putting recaps on the steering tires, which if you know anything about the trucking business, nobody ever puts recaps on steering tires. You can live through a recap that blows on a drive tire or a trailer tire, but it's not likely you're not going to cause damage to life and limb, and possibly not even your own, if you have a steering tire blow. Well, he started putting recaps on steering tires. And I told him I am not driving a truck with recaps on the steering tires. I'm not doing it. And we argued and argued and argued, and he fired me. On the spot, fired me. And I said, well, that's good, because Monday morning I start my new job with Ashland Chemical. And that's the truth. This was a Friday. And he said, you weren't going to give me any notice. I said, did you give me it? You just fired me with no notice. Of course I wasn't going to give you a notice. I've never worked for a bigger asshole in my life. You don't deserve notice. And that was it. I got fired from Weyerhaeuser because I just could not do the unethical stuff anymore. And recaps on the steering tires is where I drew the line. And he fired me. So that was how I got fired for the third time. And then I'm going to tell you about Ashland Chemical. Ashland Chemical was the job I started after Weyerhaeuser. I got fired on a Friday. Monday morning I started for Ashland. I loved that job. I loved it. I'm going to tell you about that next time. Thanks for listening.